Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you, Anne and John, for opening the meeting. I would like to introduce Carolyn Lambert, who's going to be presenting on behalf of Doug Cassidy. Caroline, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, awesome. If you could please set up your presentation and
Sure.
introduce the circles that you'll be presenting on this evening. Go ahead, take it from there.
All right. So I got, I hope everybody can see this. I got thrown into this about 3 hours ago. Well, a little bit longer than that. But so Doug Collister can't make it. And since I guess I did 2 of these counts, he asked me to take over this presentation for him. So this is not my presentation. I'm doing Doug's, but hopefully I have all the information I need to be able to share it. So the 3 areas that Doug covers are the Snake's Head, which is Sundre, Cochrane Wildlife Reserve, which is around Water Valley, and Sheep River, which is around Turner Valley. And you can see here on the map where these circles are. They're more or less in a line. They're called the Foothills counts because they're mostly in the foothills, and we'll describe that a little bit more. Okay, so this one is the Snake's Head, centered on Sundre. It's got the Red Deer River running right through it and all its tributaries. It's primarily dry mixed wood with some lower foothills on the west side. And I guess on the east side, it's going to be parkland. This is the count data for since the count started, which was like 1979. And this year's number was a bit on the low side. That's for the Snake's Head. Now, this is Cochrane Wildlife Reserve. Water Valley isn't on that map, but it's roughly in the center, I think. This is primarily lower foothills with some foothills parkland on the east side and upper foothills on the west side. There's no major drainages in this area. And this has been running since 1975, I think. And this was about average in number of species. And finally, we have the Sheep River count, which is centered on Turner Valley, I think. It is primarily lower foothills with foothills parkland on the east side, and it's subalpine on the west side. And this is the graph for the historical count numbers by species, and that is the lowest count ever in terms of number of species. These are all the participants who took part in the count. It will at least one of the counts. The bright yellow are the 5 people who took part in all 5 counts. The light orange are people who did 2 counts, and the non-highlighted people are the ones who could only participate in a single count. And so thank you for everybody who was able to come out and do these counts. I think before the count started, Doug was saying that it's getting harder and harder to find people to do these foothills counts. But hopefully we will have enough to continue to do it. So this is a summary of the statistics. These are the dates that the counts were conducted, the number of individuals found on each count, the number of subspecies, the cumulative species for each count, and the number of years the counts have been running. As you can see, some of these foothills counts are very long running. We have the number of parties that took part, and number of individuals, and temperature ranges. -19 to -1 for the Snake's Head. Well, when I was out there, it was -16 the whole time. So I don't know where it was -1, but lucky people for having it that warm. So that's, I think those temperatures are about normal. So here we go into the individual species numbers. Some of the notable things are the Snake's Head in 1987 had 70 rough-legged hawks. And compare that with this year. 70 in 1987, 54 in 1997. So that's a huge drop in the number of rough-legged hawks. Great horned owl numbers continue to be low, and Doug expresses some concern about northern goshawks and great horned owls maybe being persecuted because they predate on ringneck pheasants. He says he hopes that is not translated into illegal persecution. The most notable part of this slide, is that this is the first year since 1991 that northern shrike has not been recorded on any of these counts. So one interesting thing to note about the chickadees is that the closer you get to the mountains, the more mountain chickadees you get. So the Snake's Head has less of the foothills habitat, and Sheep River has the most of the foothills and into the subalpine, or what he called the alpine. So yeah, subalpine on the west side of the Sheep River count. And you can see that the number of mountain chickadees increases as you go west, whereas the black-capped chickadees and boreal chickadees both decrease as you go west. Because purple finch and American goldfinch are firsts for these counts. And the Harris sparrow was a really good bird, really good species for any of the counts. Trends. So from 1991 to present, we have an increase in northern flicker, blue jay, mountain chickadee, white-breasted nuthatch, and bald eagle, and decrease in the goshawks, great horned owl, and evening grosbeaks. Trends from 1991 to present for the Snake's Head, and 1980 to present in comparison. Increase in blue jays, white-breasted nuthatch, bald eagle, common raven, decrease in great horned owl and evening grosbeak. And for Cochrane Wildlife Preserve, from 1991 to present, increase in bald eagle, decrease in sharp-tailed grouse, and since 1980, there's been an increase in blue jays, mountain chickadees, white-breasted nuthatch, bald eagle, common raven. Increase here in great gray owl and northern pygmy owl. We're seeing the similar increase and decrease as on the other counts. So going way back to 1974, sharp-tailed grouse are really disappearing, but there've been an increase in all of those other species. This is a slide is a little hard to digest, but you got species on the left, and then I believe this is the high count. This is for last year. The number represents the high count for Canada. So Lethbridge last year had the high count for Canada goose, but it was also the high count across both the United States and Canada. So Calgary had the high count for mallards last year. I don't think any of these are the counts in question, but Calgary has a lot of high counts. And we have a lot of high counts for species that are also high counts for the entire United States. Okay, so going into individual species, the foothill counts have had the highest number of reported three-toed woodpeckers for 19 times, or 53% of the CBCs. Cochrane Wildlife, well, then he breaks it down by each of the foothills counts, like 17% for Cochrane and 14% for Snake's Head and 22% for Sheep River. So the Sheep River count of 15 this year has a good chance of being the North American high for the 9th time. That's for the three-toed woodpecker. A couple of interesting things about this. You'll notice that the high count for the entire continent for boreal owl was 1. So the bar is not high for some species. Same for gerfalcon. And American white pelican in High River was high count for Canada, but not for the US. Anyway, we'll go back to, see, the Canada jay could be a high count for the country and maybe the continent with these counts that we had for the season, 66 for Cochrane, 32 for Snake's Head, and 37 for Sheep River. Great gray owl has been, Cochrane and the Snake's Head have had the highest North American count 22 times, or 51%. And then he breaks it down by the percentages by count. And the Cochrane Wildlife Reserve has a good chance of being the highest again this year, Boreal chickadee is also commonly has its high count in the foothills. It will not be the high count for the US because Alaska has now joined in with two circles that have very high numbers of boreal chickadees. That was it for Cochrane Wildlife Reserve, Snake's Head, and Sheep River.
Yeah, thanks very much, Caroline. Yeah, so Neil was doing the Chestermere count this year, and I was really happy he took it on because previously we had Doug Cassidy doing it, but he stepped down this year, and Yusuf at Birds Canada had contacted me to take it on, but I thought it was too much work for myself. And I think, Neil, you had a good count, and can't wait to hear all about it here. So
I guess that was the second half of November that we arranged that I would take it on. I want to give some credit to Don for starting it in 2018 with only 4 people or couples and 9 species. And so the amount of data to draw conclusions from is really small. Up to this year, it was almost entirely people from the Chestermere area who had taken part in this count. Part of that is people living in the rural areas, people living in the farms and small towns. It's obviously, most of you will probably know, it's a very agricultural ranching area. It does have in the warmer parts of the year, it's got Chestermere Lake, it's got Weed Lake, it's got quite a lot of water, but it's rare or unusual for that to be open water on the Christmas bird count. So I think every so often there will be a winter where we get waterfowl on this count, but not this year. That's a little spoiler. And yes, Don started the count. He's run it for the last 4 years and handed over to me this year, my first time as a compiler. This is the base map. As you can see on the west, it touches the Calgary Circle, immediately west of Chestermere. Chestermere is the biggest town in it by a long way, about 20,000 people. I guess the next is Langdon, which is significantly smaller. Other places like Conrich and Delacour and sadly Lyalta is just outside of the circle. A lot of good habitat. The kind of species that you'll expect are going to be the rural species like partridge and we hope snowbuntings and larks and so on. And as it says at the top there, it was up until this year, it was divided into 4 quadrants, northwest, northeast, etc. I looked at that and said we can do more in terms of divisions. What I tried to do was to bring in a sense of the town, the residential areas, the Weed Lake area in general as its own area, and for a couple of different reasons. One is because you're going to get totally different or significantly different species in the rural areas than you are in the towns. The other is to give us smaller areas that we can give to hopefully more participants in future years. And also just to provide a variety of distance and duration and means of travel for people who have, more or less time or more or less abilities. As always, there are going to be some revisions, given this is the first year that we've had these divisions. Lots of change in a sense for the existing participants, and had a number of new people joining this year, including some quite a few good birders. I brought in some ringers, but it doesn't matter how good you are as a birder. To some extent, when you can't see more than 30 or 40 meters because of dense ground fog and ice fog, which covered the circle for much of the day. I was in Chestermere where it was slightly better, where you could see a little bit further, but it was still a really obstructive factor. Temperatures were great for a winter bird count, high of 3 and a low of -3, and winds between 9 and 13 kilometers per hour. The fog really was the main factor in restricting what we can do. 10 parties, which is more than ever before, 15 people taking part. So there were some small groups, some feeder watchers, and some diehards who drove every single road in the northeast quadrant. And the full daylight certainly was covered by various people during the day put together. As you can see, in 2018, it was a bit of a starter effort, and each of these three metrics have progressed year on year. I think the interesting thing that I see is that this year, with a tripling of, well, more than a tripling actually, 5 times as many party hours, the number of species went up by 25%. That I put down to a couple of things, and one, again, is the weather. But clearly the gain in species is not going to be quite as dramatic as the number of party hour gain. So let's take a look at the species that we saw. You'll notice the 2 highlighted count week species. One was within the circle by about 200 meters. That'll be the northern hawk owl. And I'm guessing that not a few of you have been aware of that bird in the last couple of weeks. John Cassidy was expecting a merlin at his feeders on the count day, but the merlin was awkward and came the next day. But we got it. In terms of high counts, we had several, including rock pigeon and gray partridge. Actually, that number I have there is low. There were another 30 or so added late, so just over 200 partridge. House sparrows, and I am conflicted about this number. Almost 1,000 house sparrows on the count circle. That's 30% of the individuals that we saw, pretty much. And I'll just bring attention to new species for the count. So we had 8 new species this year, from a Eurasian collared dove in Chestermere itself, a couple of adult bald eagles, the northern hawk owl, which is count week, so it doesn't actually count. I apologize, that should have been taken out. We did have a prairie falcon in the northwest, and these other species were also new to the count. I think I will just finish with my brief wishes for next year, which, not surprisingly, includes visibility. And I am putting the call out now for more participants in Chestermere. I was the only person counting, other than feeder watchers, in the town of Chestermere, 20,000 people. So I think there's definitely potential for more individuals, and almost certainly for different species as well. So I invite you all to join next year. Any questions?
Yeah, Neil, this is John Fall calling, or asking a question. It's interesting, you only had 6 house finches in your count. You know, Calgary is being, I don't know if you call it overrun with house finches, at least at the feeders anyways. But yet you only had 6 in Chestermere. It'd be interesting to speculate perhaps as to why it's such a low number, I would think, in a community such as Chestermere, right next to Calgary. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was because I was spread too thinly in Chestermere. I'm sure that there are more there. The comparison I used, I've been doing the Canmore Christmas bird count for a long time, and that's now a population of around about 15,000, 16,000, usually with 30 or so counters covering it. Chestermere had me. I think that's really the root of fewer of the species you would expect, or fewer count than you would expect if we had reasonable coverage of that town. That's the best answer I can give at this point.
Hey Neil, there's a couple questions for you in the chat here. I'll read them out to you. The first is, what will be the count day going forward?
The count day in the past has been December 19th, with me taking it on both relatively late and also immediately before our lives got unbelievably interesting for a few weeks. I had to, if I was gonna compile it, I had to push it back this year. The feelings of the previous participants have been made clear to me, and I understand that, and we'll look at a more regular and consistent date starting next year.
Another question here is, how many feeder counters did you have?
I was supposed to have 4, but for different reasons, 2 of those were unable to do it. So again, there's, I think, real potential to increase the number of feeder watchers. One thing I didn't mention is I reached out to the Chestermere Anchor for some publicity in the town, and they have been supporting this count, I think, probably since it started, and were very willing to do so again. So I have a follow-up conversation with them at some point very soon. So there's some publicity that we're getting there, but I think it's going to build over time.
Right, and one thing I'd just like to mention to everyone as well is that kind of these satellite counts around the Calgary circle there's been discussion. We haven't exactly figured it out how to just yet to somehow merge some of the areas within these Christmas circles into the May species circle. You know, when we're capturing data in the winter as well as in the spring, I think we're really getting a good snapshot of what we have living in our area at that time. So, you know, I think it's important to participate in these satellite counts. Consider, you know, Chestermere, Cochrane, Priddis, High River, all those ones are highly valuable to understanding our whole local geography and ecology. So I guess maybe after this presentation, we'll send out the recording, but maybe we'll also put in people's contact information if they're keen to participate in counts like Chestermere next year. And
Sure.
looks like we've got another question for you here, actually. So what species had been seen in previous years that were not seen this year?
Great horned owl is one. Snowy owl is another. Northern shrike. American tree sparrow in 2020 to 21, they had 18 American tree sparrows, and pine siskin, 5 in the same year. So there's only a few that we did not get that have been gone in the past. And again, I would put that down primarily to a couple of reasons. One is the weather. One is the lack of some of the winter finches, and coverage increased this year. So that's what I'd say.
All right, well, thanks very much, Neil. I don't see any other questions in the chat.
Great, thank you.
With that, I'm going to introduce Gavin.
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about the Priddis Christmas bird count, which we had on January 2nd this year. Usually try and have it kind of at the beginning of the year, right after the Fish Creek count. It worked out this year because New Year's Day was on a Sunday, so the Monday following that was a holiday, but it probably won't work out like that in the coming years. So hopefully we can still keep up good numbers of participation. The weather on this count started off pretty chilly. It was about -12, but it warmed up to about -3 in the afternoon. Yeah, so here's the Priddis circle. We have 6 different regions. We merged areas 2 and 3 this year in Tsuut'ina Nation, and that worked out pretty well. There isn't too much ground to cover there. There are only a limited number of roads, and it's not the most productive area of the count. So I think merging those together is something we'll probably do in future years as well. 5 and 6 were again very productive, and area 4 was very productive this year. Area 1 had our first American three-toed woodpecker for the count, so that was a really good addition. Yeah, so this year we had 33 species, which is a new high for the count. We've had 14 species that have been recorded in all 5 years of the count. So those would be rough-legged hawk, bald eagle, downy woodpecker, Canada jay, blue jay, black-billed magpie, common raven, black-capped chickadee, mountain chickadee, boreal chickadee, red-breasted nuthatch, white-breasted nuthatch, and Bohemian waxwing. And then the species that are in green, highlighted in green, are high counts. So we had a high count this year of 11 northern flickers, 12 hairy woodpeckers, 4 pileated woodpeckers, 61 blue jays, 81 mountain chickadees, 62 boreal chickadees, 24 red-breasted nuthatches, 14 white-breasted nuthatches, 3 brown creepers, 37 evening grosbeaks. Evening grosbeaks were usually around 30, 35. I think our numbers they haven't gone below 30, and they've gone up to 35, so it's remained pretty consistent. And then dark-eyed juncos with 20. The other species are also high counts, the ones in this late yellow here, but those are also ones that are new to the count. I think the best bird of the day was a sharp-tailed grouse, small flock that was seen at Ann and Sandy Cross Conservation Area. Sharp-shinned hawk was also new. 2 overdue additions were great gray owl and great horned owl. It's really surprising to me that neither of those species have been seen on the count up until this year. Same with American three-toed woodpecker, and Townsend solitaire and red crossbill were great additions too. The total number of individual birds we saw was 992, which is a little bit lower than some of the past years, but we really didn't have a great year for winter finches. There weren't big flocks of crossbills and redpolls, and our numbers of Bohemian waxwings were fairly low, generally speaking. So I think that contributes to it as well. Yeah, so here's over the years of the 5 years we've been doing this count. Here we show the number of species. It's remained fairly consistent, but it's gone up a little bit as we get a few more participants. Other than 2021, we only had 12 participants and we got 31 species. But that year we had people spread out a little bit more because of COVID. We couldn't travel in groups. So that actually worked out well for that count. 33 species was the high, but it's remained around 30, in the low 30s for the last few years. And then the total number of individuals, as I just mentioned, was a little bit lower. We had more participants this year than we've ever had before, which is great. I'd like to see that trend keep going up. The more participants we get, the better coverage we can have of the area, and the better data we can have. So I think that pretty much all I have for slides here. If anyone has any questions, this was a long-tailed weasel photographed by Curtis Dohaniuk on the count. I sent out a message today asking if anyone on the count had photos of any birds they saw on count day, and nobody really seemed to have any. So this is what we get here. Do we ever get waterfowl? There's really very limited open water in this count circle. So the numbers of waterfowl, we've had some Canada geese. By some, I mean, I don't think we've had over 100. And I think that was in the first year, just flyovers. So we don't really get waterfowl. Yes, it includes Barbers Place.
Hey, Gavin, how much higher I see the evening grosbeak as a new high count. Is that exceptionally higher than previous years, or?
No, we've been hovering around low 30s. I think last year we had 35. So it's remained pretty consistent. This year there was another feeder, not a feeder watcher, but a feeder that one of our participants, I guess an acquaintance of one of our participants, and they went there on count day and managed to find some more evening grosbeaks. So that's where that came from, because usually we were getting them just kind of scattered around a little bit, and one feeder was regularly getting them.
Do you have any feeder watchers on this count?
Yeah, we have one feeder watcher. We could have more, but we really don't. There are other feeders that people visit, but they're not being watched throughout the count day. There aren't really that many towns in the count circle, so that doesn't really help with getting feeder watchers. There's a couple feeders in Priddis, but they're not super active. We usually check those as we do our little walk around the town. But other than that, Bragg Creek's out of the circle, so it cuts off right at Bragg Creek. So we can't really include any of that.
All right, Gavin, with that, I'll introduce Jim Washbrook to present the Fish Creek annual count.
So this is the Fish Creek Provincial Park count. It's a little bit different from some of the other counts in that, so it covers Fish Creek Park. It's really a census of the bird life, because it isn't a circle. Somebody started it back in '94 and ran it for a few years, and somebody else asked me a long time ago if I would take it over, and I didn't step back fast enough. And so I've been doing it, I don't know how long. We seem to like it. And so we have data of all the birds that have ever been seen in the park since 1994. And it's always on January 1st. That makes it easier. For some reason, grabbed it as a New Year's Day count. It's only a half a day though. So we start sunrise, 8:30, 9 o'clock, somewhere around there, depending on which end of the park you're at, and go till about noon. Then we meet up at Tim Hortons afterwards. And if anybody wants to see the data back all the way back to 1994, then that is available. This year, we had actually quite a few participants. I wanted to start off with this. Dave Russum, Blake, and Jim St. Laurent, Tony Timmons, John Thompson, Sheila Clark, Ross Lean, and Bob Leonhardt. They coordinate the teams for the participants, and that worked out. Review of the park. So as you can see, there's the areas go through Shannon Terrace, Marshall Springs, Vaudier's Flats. We've added Glenfield. Bob Leonhardt has started doing the birding in Glenfield the last couple of years. So we get a little bit of coverage between McLeod Trail and Bridge 9, I think it is. And then there's an open space down at the bottom as Halls Wood, and then 3 counts on along the Bow River. So it's really two different habitats. It's a different, clearer look at it, seeing how it's all along Fish Creek and then along the Bow River. Of course, up here at Poplar Island, things have changed a little bit there because we may recall that in 2013, there was a big flood. This channel through separating Poplar Island from the mainland used to be crossable, and we could do the count on Poplar Island. Now, since 2013, that isn't accessible at all anymore. The river's really cut a deep channel, and it's inaccessible. So we have people walking along one side of the channel and people on the other side of the Bow River looking down onto the river in Poplar Island. Complicates things a bit, but it keeps it interesting. Highlights for this year. Well, like I said, it's the 30th annual count. We had 36 species, which was above the 10-year average. The record high numbers were from flickers, which it looks like from some of the other counts, flickers are doing well this year. And solitaires have increased and really shown up more in the last while. So we had a record high of those. The oddities, green-winged teal and a couple of ring-necked ducks. Both of these were right around Mallard Point up on the Bow River. We had a beautiful day, especially in the next slide, I think it is, or one of the next slides shows what the temperature was last year. And this one, -8, no wind, up to +1. This was an awesome day. A little foggy, very foggy on the river at first, but on the Bow River, but that cleared up by just about quitting time, actually. By the numbers, there's been 84 species since seen in the park, but a lot of them are one-ofs and some of them have gone down over the years. The last 5 years, we've just had 61 cumulative species. And like I say, we had 36 species this year, which was up just a little bit. This year, I was almost short of people. And then Bob Lefebvre sent out an email saying, does anybody want to give Jim a hand with this? And it wasn't that short of people, but all of a sudden I had 10 or 15 extra people. So he's a good marketing guy. All in all, it was a beautiful day for birding. This one gives a little idea from 1994 on the left up to 2023 and shows the temperature in blue at the bottom. So last year was the second coldest year ever. And this year was much more normal. The red number is the number of species, and the number of species has stayed, consistent over the last 5 or 7 years. And the number of participants went up a little bit in this year. Got to check. I'm not sure what happened, where all these people came from back in 2015, but it was pretty crowded then, it seems. And the species count is almost relative to that. This is, if you're looking at this on your cell phone, this might be a little bit busy, but this gives the, across the top is the 8 areas, the 3 going west to east along the Fish Creek Park. Glenfield is a new one, just has 2 years worth of data. And then after that, Hulls Wood has both the creek and the river. And then the other 3 the next 3 are all along the river. Lafarge Rotary with Ross Lean and Val Hines, they started this one about 6 years ago. So it's south of Highway 22. You can see that most of the waterfowl are, on the Bow River, but the little anomaly, besides the mallards going down, in Glenfield up by McLeod Trail is a patch of open creek, and that are the highest number of mallards. Go figure. On the left side, where you see the species, the ones in red, of course, are the ones that are going down. The ones in dark green are going up, and we always like to see more greens than reds. The 2 little light greens, the green-winged teal and the ring-necked ducks, they're kind of an anomaly, but not new to the count, but definitely a treat to see. What are the interesting ones? What were some of the ones we're going to talk about, highlight later, is bald eagles. Only one up in Glenfield and one south of 22X in by Rotary Park. That's a real decline for them. And I wonder if that has to do with the mallards and the geese being so low as well. Because if there's nothing to eat, maybe they go up the river to the Calgary count. I think Matt might have some answers for that, some clarification in his presentation. The highlights for this year were the northern flickers were really higher than usual numbers, as well as Townsend solitaires. Getting 7 of them is quite a treat. And of course, the other birds, the ravens and stuff, and the geese, they make, they can sing and stuff, but hearing a Townsend solitaire singing in the forest in the wintertime, gotta love those guys. So the ones that are, about average, the chickadees, the pigeons, of course, Bufflehead stayed good. And trumpeter swans, we only saw 4 flying by, but we've been getting, those in Calgary more often lately. So that's nice to see that those guys, pileated woodpecker, we get a couple of those. Interestingly, we didn't get any 3-toed woodpeckers this year, but those, you got to be kind of lucky just to be looking or being in the right area at the right time. They're usually there, but didn't count any this year. The ones that are above the 10-year average, of course, are the solitaires and the flickers, ringneck ducks and merlins. There weren't very many of them, but it was nice to see them. The unusual species, ringneck ducks and green-winged teals, everything below that was above their 10-year average. We're getting more robins in the park. Mountain chickadees are up. Barrow's goldeneye have been increasing, as well as the nuthatches are still doing well. A lot of these birds that we see down, like the mountain chickadees and the nuthatches, because of the park being more enclosed, it's by urbanization, we're probably getting a lot more birds of those kind, downy woodpeckers and the chickadees at feeders, especially on the southwest corner of the park. There's a lot more feeders. The ones that are below the 10-year average, for the ones that we saw this year, are these first ones, of course, Canada goose, mallard, bald eagle, boreal chickadee. We'll talk about that later. Bohemian waxwings come and go. Great horned owls, we only got the 1, and usually we get 2. Well, I guess the average is 2. So good that we at least got the 1. All these other species down below are ones that we did not get at all this year. And like the red poles and white-winged crossbills are ones that we've seen fairly regularly in pine grosbeaks. So we got none of those, and yet in the 10-year average, we usually see at least some of them. I like just a few graphs of some of the interesting ones. Bald eagles are down, mallards are down, could be related. Canada geese are down. One of the things, I don't know if you noticed, the ones that are up are the more diving ducks, like the goldeneyes, barrows in common. The buffleheads are doing well. So the diving ducks seem to do well. The dabblers, like mallards, and I think we call Canada geese dabblers, because they don't dive, that's for sure, and they sometimes eat lower down. They're not as many of them, for lack of a better word, down in that end of the river. And I wonder if the river's getting too deep for dabblers like mallards and not enough shallow water. Hard to say on that one. And so consequently, we're lucky to see one bald eagle along the river and one further up the creek. I always like chickadees. As you can see from the upper left, black-capped chickadees since 1994. Yeah, they're pretty much holding their own. They're doing all right. Mountain chickadees, not seen at all before 2015. Suddenly, we're getting, 8 this year. I guess that's not an abundance, but they're starting to show up in the city, or in that probably primarily the west end of the park. But on the other hand, boreal chickadees, a steady downward trend since 94, and down to just a couple this year in the count. What else? Nuthatches. Nuthatches I like nuthatches. They're both up. The trend is somewhat upwards, and so that's a good sign. They're always nice to see. These are all the people, the leaders. They were great too. I just phoned them up and say, can you find your people that you had last year, and can you take on a few others? We did have a number of extra people. One person that I should highlight is Laura Fitzpatrick. She does all my data now, and that takes a heck of a load off. And yeah, does beautiful spreadsheets. I have no idea how those formulas work, but they make the putting together this presentation a lot easier, and makes the data a lot more clearer. So for next year, it's going to be on January 1st, as per usual, 2024. Mark that in your calendar. If you have any questions, let me know.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you. In the comments, it says that Bill Walker started the Fish Creek count.
That's his name. Thank you. Forgot it.
Hi, this is John McFall here. I thought I just picked out the little intro from Bill Walker on that count as to why he started the count. So it reads, he came from Deep River, Ottawa, near Ottawa in 1993. He came to Calgary because his daughter and family were living here, and he spent time in Fish Creek Park. And he was aware that the Calgary Circle for the Christmas bird count was outside of Fish Creek Park, and thought that this neglect ought to be corrected. And so that's why he started the count in Fish Creek, to make amends for the fact that the Calgary count did not include Fish Creek. So that's how it got going.
Okay, so that's probably better than having the Fish Creek count circle being a nice circle with a little blip down at the end that includes the park. That looks like it might be all the questions, Matt.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thanks very much, Jim. If you're able to stick around to the end, I'll present for about 15 minutes here. And I thought I would include our official city bird, black-capped chickadee, on the cover this year. I had asked a lot of participants to submit photos, and we did get some, mostly from feeder watchers, I'll say, because it was so cold that day. Count week ran from the December 15th until the 21st, and we did pick up a couple count week birds. I'll jump into that a bit later. And our count day was on December 18th, 2021. So this was the 71st annual count. I kind of reused this slide from last year, tried to make it a little snazzier, but I always kind of come back to maybe why we do this. And I think Christmas bird counts are just a beautiful thing, not only for, the community practice, but the fact that we can actually monitor changes in our environment using birds as kind of an ecological signifier. So this is 1984, and you can see what's happened is that over time, there's just been so much growth within our city that we've actually exceeded a lot of our circles. So just flipping back and forth, you can see we had a lot of natural areas along the edges, ravines, that type of thing. And now it's past that. And there'll be some major changes that happen into the future. There'll be a densification within this core, and that will also put more pressure on our natural areas and those types of things. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with our counts over time. And I'm very proud to be a part of the Calgary Christmas bird count and Nature Calgary for, helping to encourage people to get out there, appreciate it as is, and help us to all learn about these things over time. So, as I said, this year was frustratingly cold. It was a low of -21. Or sorry, I guess that would be the high, actually. High of -21. We recorded -25 Celsius in the morning, which wasn't all that pleasant. And the winds ranged from about 15 kilometers an hour to 30-kilometer-hour gusts at some time. So despite that, I had real worries that we were going to lose a lot of participants. We actually didn't lose that many field surveyors compared to our average. We were only down 7% from our 15-year average. I was just amazed at that. On top of that, the field teams actually put in 16% more hours than they had over the 15 years, which is just mind-blowing to me. So what you can see here is that, just kind of our party hours since we began recording them in mid-1970s or late 1970s there, and the number of participants. We're still doing pretty well in terms of our coverage. We are still one of the larger counts, not only in Alberta, but in Western Canada. But despite the conditions, I was really happy to see that we were able to stick it out. And you may recall that a couple of years ago, we started using eBird for submissions. This is actually the map on the left of our eBird submissions from 2021. I'll show you what it looks like in 2022 because we had about, 40 more this year. And you can see it actually looks like a circle now. So we have so many people that are familiar with using eBird and sharing their data that the actual spread of the eBird checklist, which is recorded in our trip report, if you want to look it up, the link is here. It actually takes on the shape of the circle now, which I'm really ecstatic about. You can also see the difference in how people are choosing to submit. This wasn't because necessarily we had a few new field captains and that thing, but we only had 7 templates. So that's 7, either paper templates or templates that were scanned and sent to us. That compares to 16 last year when we really made the first push for eBird. But I think this is a very promising trend. And same with Jim. I also put a lot of dependence on Lara to really, work this system. And she's done a fantastic job doing it, not only with the Christmas bird counts throughout Southern Alberta, but also for the May species counts. As for the feeders, those are still happening pretty much manually. So we provide a template for them. They're submitting by phone and email to either a captain or just submitting their template directly. There's always a lot of questions about why this is. And I guess a presentation like this is great to get the answer out there. The thing with using eBird is that the count practice for eBird, you choose the cumulative count over the course of your watch. But for the Christmas bird count, we only want the highest count of a species seen at any time. And what that means is that there's just too much room for error for us to check all of the feeder watcher submissions for those, as well as the data is not considered, research grade. It will go to non-confirmed checklists or unconfirmed casual checklist. Gavin, jump in here if you.
Incidental checklist.
Incidental, yeah, that's right. So, and that just becomes a bit too hard for us to regulate all that stuff. So we're sticking with the templates for feeder watchers from now and into the future. And I'll show you a couple reasons for that. So another really interesting thing I found using eBird for this is that, on our previous templates, we used to review all the comments for eagles and those types of unique sightings. And now literally I can just click on bald eagle within the trip report and I can view everybody's comments and even the timestamp that people are putting in there. And that makes it so easy to confirm the number of birds actually seen and if they may conflict with another area on the map. In terms of adjustments, it makes it really quick. I'll show you a map of our feeder watchers this year. You can see that there's actually a couple people that participated outside the circle. So I include those as we haven't included those as participants or the bird numbers, and that's just because they're outside the circle, but we're really happy to have them involved. And if you're one of them, I'm sorry, but that's just luck of the draw there. One of the things that I do with these feeder watcher addresses, which is why I use the registration form at the beginning of the year, it's not only to make sure that I have the most up-to-date information and have an understanding of what people or who would like to participate, but I actually do a date or a distance matrix at the end of all of our submissions. And essentially, I've just created a brief example here. It pulls up for every single one of these dots, it creates a distance to its nearest neighbor. So you can see there's a little bit of clustering of these houses here in the northwest and kind of in the south. I can measure the distances between the houses exactly. And this is based on kind of geotagging the addresses. And I don't share any of this information publicly, just so you know, but it's for me to understand if we're double counting birds. This year, like I just had removed the addresses, but we had 9 people that were, I say 150 meters, but at 156 meters, I've included that. So those houses that are within kind of that relative distance, we merged the highest counts for those birds to ensure that we're not double counting birds. Yeah, I know 150 is a bit of a subjective measure, but it's the best we can do. And it's the best way we have to allow more participants to join each year and still have some protocols where we can measure and account for what they're doing. So this year we had 44,063 individuals. That's after all of the adjustments we've made. So there wasn't all that many made, but I think it was about minus 4,000 birds off the top. I've included Andrew Hart's photo here because I really felt that this was, it captured the day almost perfectly for everyone in the field there. We were cold and so were the birds. You can see that even from the mist of the river, the steam, they were freezing snow on the back there. Lou had sent me these two awesome photos. One was from Count Week, I believe, but I was really happy to hear that everyone was just, enjoying everything that they were seeing. And when cameras worked, they could actually get a photo. So we finished with 65 species, which is right on average for us in the Calgary count, despite the cold conditions. The number of individuals actually is quite a bit lower, but no issues there. We added one new species to the count of all time this year, which is a white-winged dove. This is actually the only photo I have of it, and I think it's perfectly representative of this bird. I can't really provide any information on it, so I'm just going to leave it at that, but we're always welcoming new species each year and grateful for the person who took the time to look at that thing that looked a bit different than the typical pigeon. I think this year, if you've been out birding, you have been amazed by the number of dark-eyed juncos. We had 670 this year, almost double that of our highest count previous. We've had a lot of American goldfinches. They weren't just in one single place like Queen's Park, but even at people's feeders, like this one kind of in the Mount Royal area. Tundra swan, it's nothing really to brag about. We're having a new record for that at 2 compared to the previous high of 1. We tied trumpeter swans with the prior record counts, and I wonder if those are the same ones that Jim had actually counted. I'm not sure if we've ever been in a situation where we tried to correct other circle counts or day counts, but the northern shoveler was a really good find. We haven't had too many of those in the past little bit. Only 5 records since 1952 of a northern shoveler. And the varied thrush, only 12 CBC reports on that since 1952. We did have a canvasback, which only 11 reports, and we had a common grackle. I do have some photos, but unfortunately I didn't put them in the presentation. This was originally reported as a rusty blackbird, which we were still excited about, but then this is the kind of thing we do some follow-up on our feeder count templates that are submitted. So we checked it out, and yes, a common grackle. And it sounds like it's been living off some Wonder Bread, so wonderful to have it here. There was actually a couple misses this year. The one that surprises me is really the pine grosbeak. 14 of the last 15 years we've had. Wood duck, I think we usually find about 1 at least, but we did get it on Count Week, and I'm sure you've seen some reports that there are wood ducks, or maybe you saw it yourself this week. The notable low counts for the year, definitely kind of this finch complex. All these boreal finches I have a theory about it, but I really felt that this year was going to be our year for the finches. So crossbills, pine siskins, and red poles just way, way down. I think we all recognize that there's an incredible cone crop and seed crop within the city of Calgary right now. The trees are still drooping. We've got no finches to take care of these things. What I kind of suspect is that for all these finches, actually, there's such a good cone crop at more than northern latitudes that they're actually hanging out there. There's no reason for them to come this far to the city. So hopefully maybe some of those cones will stick around till next year and support these guys once they decimate the boreal. Although it was really cold this year, it wasn't our coldest on record. So as you can see right at the right here, we have kind of the high and low showing his little bar. 1982, look at this spread, -20 to -30 in a single day. We had in was this 1994, I think 95, almost maintained minus 30 the entire day. And then in the 2000s, we also had another really cold one. So this is one of the, probably top 5 coldest days that we've ever run the Calgary Christmas bird count on. But overall, I still would call it a success based on all the people that got outside and the people that recorded or PVR'd the Grey Cup, or not even Grey Cup, the World Cup. We were quite down compared to previous years. You can still see that, on trend, we're still way above where we once were with Canada geese in the city of Calgary. But it sounds like there's a lot of counts in Alberta where the geese were quite low. It's the same for mallard, as you can see. There's been some suggestion that this is due to avian flu or perhaps more open water in some areas. We've only had some short stints of really cold weather. There's a lot of things that it's hard to make any assumptions based off this one year compared to previous. One thing we didn't do, but I know some other count compilers requested around North America, was actually to count dead birds and submit those numbers as deceased. We didn't really receive anything from people this year, but perhaps if you collected that data and you wanted us to hold on to it, perhaps it's something we should consider doing in future years, I believe. So here's the dark-eyed junco. You can see, over time, more and more, but this year was to the moon. And here's kind of our overall count. I recognize I should have probably color-coded this a bit better, but overall, I think we had a really good count with all the usual suspects. The pine grosbeak, it kind of stings for me because I just feel like I can't really explain that one with all the fruit that we still have in the city. But generally, our woodpeckers were okay. I think we were down maybe 5 or 6 on average for the pileated woodpeckers. We didn't have a great year for raptors as a whole, and I don't necessarily blame that on our survey time or how we were surveying, but I think this is more a behavioral trait. Jim had asked if I had any ideas about the bald eagles, and bald eagles are still doing pretty well across the whole count circle at 33. That's still above average for us. I think this year, a couple things were interesting for myself was, although usual, this golden crown kinglet, they were dispersed pretty thoroughly throughout the circle, which is unique. Our magpie numbers, house finch numbers, house sparrow numbers are still through the roof. We did have a fairly successful year for Bohemian waxwings. This number is toned down from the raw number, which was a bit higher originally, but after some investigation, we had to take it back a slight amount. So just kind of going into the effort, one last little thing here is our total distance traveled. Every year it gets to be more and more. So this is 1,517 kilometers in total. And that's from people driving up every single road pretty much and then hiking on foot. It's incredible to think that with only a 24-kilometer circle, you can drive pretty much the distance to Vancouver in a single day. Next year, our count day is going to be December 17th. Could have put it on the last Sunday before Christmas, but that's December 24th. So I think December 17th will make the most sense. Looking forward to working with, our satellite compilers to ensure that we have some good spacing between the counts, and we'll try and get everyone out to participate in those. I also want to thank Tsuut'ina Nation for providing the permits, not only for W10, which is my section, but also for the Priddis count, which allows Gavin to participate there. It's been a successful partnership over the past couple of years. I'll also say that I have some more analysis I still need to finish, and I hope to put together a little video about a bit more in depth and dive into some more discussion opportunities. So look forward to that probably at the end of January. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Okay, so let's see for questions here. It says, I wonder in very cold weather, there is less likelihood that feeder birds will use multiple feeder locations and thus will not be double counted. It's a possibility, but that's why I've kind of made the range of only 150 meters between households. Like, I don't think there's any reason to expand it or make it any closer, depending on weather. I think currently I feel that 150 meters is okay for that. As for the Cochrane count, so Kirsten Pearson of the Cochrane compiler, they've just been having some scheduling issues due to family sickness and that type of thing this week. I know that she will be presenting the results at some point, but unfortunately she couldn't be here tonight. Do I have any idea regarding the explosion of American goldfinch? To be honest, I'm not really all that certain at this point about the American goldfinch. I know that they, like throughout the end of summer and fall, they were pretty prolific throughout like most habitats that I was visiting in. Perhaps there was enough grain, enough seed for them to stick it out, and they've just decided to stay. So I can't really say for sure, but definitely in part, our feeders do play a role in the types of birds that we find in the urban environment. So if you're feeding birds, you may unknowingly be kind of encouraging them to be here. The best thing I can say is always keep your feeders clean and try and be a responsible bird watcher and bird feeder. Thank you very much for joining us with Nature Calgary tonight.